I plan on going out for a walk with my medium format Bronica camera to North Wales tomorrow, but the forecast is a little bit threatening and I'm not expecting to get wonderful bright scenes. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be a useful opportunity to test a couple of my favourite slide films, Velvia 100 and Provia 100, just to see how they compare and how they handle the lighting conditions. So I'm going to pack my gear up, get up early tomorrow morning, get down there for sunrise if there is one, and see how I get on.
Well, I've come out this morning to Llyn Dinas in Snowdonia. Beautiful lake. Going to go for a walk around it. You can probably see it behind me. It's a little bit dull and wet at the moment, but it is just after sunrise. And it is set to clear up slightly before starting to rain again later. So I'm going to crack on, walk around the lake, get up a bit higher onto the mountains, see what we can see. Well, while I was plodding my way up a steep hill to try and get a view across the lake, I came across the scene behind me of an old, sorry about the rain, of an old wrecked cottage, some sort of shelter with a tree growing out of it. Now, normally I wouldn't really shoot this, but given the conditions, I mean, it's quite dark, but it is very, very atmospheric. And the two films I'm shooting today, Provia and Velvia 100, are ideally suited, and that's why I brought them. So I think I will break out the camera and see if I can make a composition of this. Alright, I'm set up now and I've put my short telephoto zoom on. It's about 85mm equivalent. And that's given me a nice tight crop. I want to exclude any sky, obviously. And I also don't want too many of the trees which are surrounding to get in the way, and sort of the branches, some of them are pulling out of the frame, so I need to make sure I've excluded those. So I'm going to shoot it at about f11. I don't need much depth of field. And it is quite a straightforward image. Just take a meter reading now and I'll pop those up on the screen when I've taken the shots. Got nice views behind me, but the sky's not really cleared enough. It's very murky. I'm hoping to get a bit further around the lake and maybe get a view. If not, I'll probably head back along the lakeside and head up another path to the top end of the lake where I parked, and some nice views there. And the forecast is to clear slightly, so maybe good timing. You know, it's absolutely lovely up here. Even if I don't get any pictures, and I'm pretty certain I will, I'm having a lovely time. It's just so mild, so empty and so beautiful. What a great hobby photography is. I'm sat here having a break and I'm looking at an absolutely fantastic view. But the strange thing is I have no desire to photograph it because I don't think it'll make a great photograph. It's absolutely stunning to be here, but when I look at it through the compositional devices like my iPhone, I don't know, it's just a little bit bland. I mean, it's far nicer being here than it is making the photograph. So I'm not going to spend my time wasting film, setting up the camera. I'm just going to enjoy the moment. But it's an interesting point though. What makes a good photograph isn't necessarily what's nice to look at when you're in the scene itself. Well, I've come across something that's caught my eye. It's quite simple, deceptively simple. It's this, it's just sort of weeds and an old tree trunk and a few ferns really growing. But it's absolutely beautiful in the square format and it's vibrant and lush. Now, I'm shooting this with both the Velvia 100 and the Provia 100. Dynamic range is about 4 stops, so it's well within the capabilities of both slide films. Will be interesting though to see how it comes out. I'll put the images up at the end of this video and do them side by side in more detail, but yeah, I'm quite pleased, and this is something a bit more than expected on this day. I was expecting the big scenes, but yeah, really happy to be working on this intimate detail level. Well, unfortunately for the past couple of hours it's been absolutely dreadful weather. I went up a mountain, came down the mountain, absolutely nothing to see apart from rain. It's very nice out in terms of the vegetation, but I can't set up for a shot and I keep losing the mountains in the distance, so I'm going to shoot back down to the car. I might see something on the way and I might try and work along the lakeside a bit. Well, I've moved on from the lake now and I'm going to try my hand at shooting an old bridge which is near SQAi. Apologies for the noise, it's the waterfalls. Well, I'm shooting above the SQAi area now and I've got a nice long view down the valley. 150mm lens on with a converter just to really crop in, and I'm shooting at about 1/8 of a second for both of them, both for the Provia and for the Velvia 100. It's another good comparison, I think, because there's plenty of greens in there, so we'll see what the separation's like and also how it handles the highlight details. Okay, whilst desperately trying to use up these rolls of film before I get home, I don't want to waste any of these frames. It's all expense and it's all experimentation. I've got another shot behind me of this lovely stone wall with a couple of trees jutting into it with some lovely, really bright green leaves in there. Now there's quite a depth of shadow, but the exposure range is still within 4 stops, so perfect for my slide films. So a couple of frames again, and let's see how they compare. Okay, so now we have the slides developed. Let's get them on the Lightbox and see how they compare. Now, the main advantage of using a Lightbox to assess materials, particularly slide materials, is that it takes away the scanning element where changes can be introduced. If I scan these two, and I will scan them and show you them scanned as well, then there will be differences in the density of the images because of the way the scanner behaves and also because of the way I make adjustments, and some adjustments are made automatically for me, unfortunately. So let's have a look at the first shots from the day of the old abandoned derelict building. Now,
what we have here on the left is the Velvia 100, and on the right we have the Provia. And it's quite obvious to me straight away that the slides on the right are slightly lighter, that's the Provia, and the ones on the left obviously darker. Now I did a -1 exposure stop here, so this looks very dark, this slide, and on some of the others I did a +1 just to compare the differences in density and how it handles the highlights. So the greens are more vivid in the Velvia 100, which isn't a surprise. But having said that, the Provia has held up surprisingly well. So looking at some of the images from slightly later, excuse me, I'm struggling here to get this on the Lightbox. We have the images of the bridge with the deluge of water, which are very similar, again slightly lighter for the Provia than the Velvia, and a couple of shots from above the Sekonic. Now here I did a +1 exposure, so you can see that there's actually not much difference in these two. They're much closer than the others. Both have held the highlights well. Slightly bluer tinge to the sky detail in the Velvia shot. Strangely, I would have expected that from the Provia. Okay, so moving on to the last sequence of shots, which was down at Pembroke Bridge. Again, Provia on the right, Velvia 100 on the left. Much more vivid greens in the Velvia, but the Provia is very natural. I'm loving that look there. Very neutral overall. And again, just as before, slightly denser blacks in the Velvia 100. If I'm looking at these two here, this is a standard exposure, and this is +1. Now the wall at the back, the rocks, are much darker on the Velvia 100. It really needed the +1 exposure, whereas I might get away with getting all the shadow detail out of the Provia. And this tends to confirm what I've heard many times before, which is the base on Provia isn't quite as dense, and also it looks like the blacks aren't quite as deep. So whether that's more dynamic range or not, I just don't know. So anyway, let's get them scanned and bring them up on the big screen and see how they look side by side in Lightroom. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've arranged the images in the same way as before, with the Velvia 100 image to the left and the Provia to the right. And you can see quite quickly that there's a big difference in the tonality and the colour range within each, the Provia being much more green and much more of a reddish tint to the Velvia 100 images. Now I scanned these in a very straightforward manner. I just made sure I didn't clip the highlights or the shadows, and I brought the midtones up slightly, about the same in each image as far as I could judge them. So let's have a look at a couple side by side, starting with the first image of the derelict building. Okay, now you can see here that the balance is definitely shifting towards red with the Velvia 100. Let's have a look into the shadow detail now. Now at 100% you can see that the extreme shadows are being clipped, they're being lost here within the image, whereas there's a bit more detail in the Provia image. It's definitely cleaner in there. That's going to be easier for me to work with if I wanted to make a large print. The rest of the image very nice, highlights are about the same. Okay, so let's go in now and have a look at the one which is exposed at -1 stop. So this is a bit of a torture test for slide films, and I think you can see straight away without me even enlarging that the Velvia 100 image is struggling now. It's gone very dark. The highlights are still there, comparable to the Provia, but the Provia has much better shadow detail. It's retained information in those shadows, and I could make a decent print from the Provia image. I certainly couldn't from that Velvia image. Okay, so moving on, let's look at this image because we didn't look at it in any detail on the Lightbox. Again, reddish tinge towards the details of the bark on the Velvia, more neutral on the Provia. There is some nice separation going on in tones there. It would be a toss-up for me which one I preferred. But then again, the shadow detail is better on the Provia. It's sort of turning out to be a bit of a common theme on these shots. Let's look at these open shots with some sky in them now, taken of Sekonic. Velvia has got less detail in the sky. It might not be totally apparent watching the video, but it's quite clear to me on my screen, which is fully calibrated. And also the greens are a bit muddy, a little bit darker there, but there is some nice separation. I'll be honest, I do like this subtle bluish tone that should settled into the shadows in the trees here. It's providing me more separation, so that one's a bit more of a close call. But if you look at the +1 image now to see how it's handled over exposure, the skies are really starting to lose it a bit now with the Velvia image, and although they are going off with Provia, I can still see detail over here on the right. Also, this bluish tinge, which I liked a moment ago, is a bit strong now, and that would have to be corrected, whereas very neutral in the Provia. Do like these trees though in Velvia, a little bit more separation here. I'd have to introduce a bit of burning to create that effect, which I quite like there in the Velvia. Okay, so let's have a look at another one. Let's pick up on this exposure here of the stone wall at Pemmakno Bridge. Velvia very dark again, but some lovely detail in these leaves here. Again, the highlights comparable, not much difference there. But when I dive into the shadows, it's the same old story. There is more information in this Provia image here, so it's not just my eyes kidding me on the Lightbox, it's actually showing up clearly in the scans as well. So what about the one at +1, which should help the Velvia image out somewhat? Oops, zoomed in 100%. That looks a lot better for the Velvia image. I would certainly favour that over the previous one, and it's still retained detail in the highlights. Provia again though has got those lovely open shadows at +1. It's got more detail in this moss, clearly to my eyes. And over here in this, let's choose that section down there, that's quite inky black. There is a lot more information. These leaves here and these little twigs can be differentiated quite clearly. It's sort of going off here, it's a bit ugly. So I would prefer the Provia shot there. So that was quite interesting, and it's sort of slightly unexpected. I was hoping the Velvia would have the same sort of range as the Provia. Now I think it may have the same dynamic range, but the problem is that the base is very, very deep, and my V700 is having problems with it, whereas a better scanner may well cope and handle those deep inky blacks a lot better. So yeah, very interesting I think. Well, I do hope you found that little test of the two Fuji slide films useful. I certainly did. I didn't know how subtle the differences were. I thought they were going to be quite marked, but overall my impressions are that Provia 100 is my favourite of the two. I'm liking the neutrality of it. I also love the extra shadow detail. Having a V700 Epson scanner means I can't really penetrate the inky blacks of the Velvia film as much. I would need more exposure, which means I need to have slower speeds, which means more camera movement, etc. So I think I will go with Provia in the future. However, I also like Velvia 50, so I think in an upcoming video I'll run Velvia 50 alongside Provia 100 and see how that comes out. And I also want to do some tests with some of the negative films such as Portra 400 and Fuji 400H. So once again, I hope you found this video interesting, and I'll see you again on the next trip.